I think what Humane has proven that you can have really, really tiny projectors. It was a very exciting experiment of playing with things that were not, were not there. We really invented some things that we thought could be the future. If there is more value than the friction that you bring into the world and your product is successful, the market at the end is what is making the product. There are manuals on how to run startups, and they tell you that you need to fail fast and fail cheaply. Even if you are ex-Apple, you have the best team, at the end of the day that still applies. Apple is successful the way it is because their first product was built by 3 people in a garage, and working at Apple is an incredible experience because you basically are seeing behind the curtains of the Wizard of Oz. The thing that really felt challenging was feeling that you are so tiny and not very important for the company.
Hi folks, my name is Arsenia and this is Product Craft. Today's episode is with Pier Dalla Rosa. Sorry Pier if I butchered that. An Italian-born designer, entrepreneur, and founder. Pier brings together a rare blend of artistic vision, leadership, and technical expertise working across both hardware and software to create forward-thinking products and experiences. Over the past decade, he's worked with companies like Apple, Neo, Panasonic, and more recently Humane, where he was part of one of the boldest hardware launches in recent years. We get a behind-the-scenes look at Humane with some fascinating insights and hard-earned lessons. We also dive into Pier's own venture, building a hardware device to measure air quality, which is really cool. We explore what it takes to innovate across hardware and software, Pier's approach and principles, and his unique path into the tech industry. This is a really fun episode, so please enjoy. And if you do like the show, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment below. It takes a lot of work to put these episodes together, actually a lot more than I originally thought. And so if you're watching, your support means a lot. All right, here it is. Pierre, welcome to Product Craft.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you for joining. My motivation to start this podcast was to talk with people who dedicated their life to the craft of making products. I wanted to explore what's going on behind the scenes, some of the real challenges, the struggles, the passion, dedication, success or failures. And with each episode, I'm rethinking the definition of craft and really what it means, because there's so many aspects to making a product. You have an incredibly interesting background and expertise, something that is quite rare. You worked with companies like Apple, Neo. Most recently, you worked at Humane, and you have really exciting background that I'm really excited to tap into it and share with the folks about your journey. Also, you teach at Jacobs Institute for Design Innovation at UC Berkeley. And in the past, you taught at California College of Arts and Crafts, Hyper Island, and CIID, the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design, if I got it correctly. Yeah, so really impressive. Yeah, really impressive background. And I wanted to kick us off with the question, did you first start in hardware or in software? Maybe if you can share a brief story, kind of what ignited your passion.
I'm very excited to be here. To get started, I think my background is, I really liked computers when I was growing up. And probably this is a story of many that are working in this industry. But I didn't want to just dedicate myself to computers, so joining a computer science or software engineering degree. And I was very, very young at the time. And I found a course in cinema engineering that is a course, was a course offered in Italy in the Politecnico of Torino. That is a school, one of the major technical schools. And the course was really, really interesting because it taught technology applied to cinematography and the world of new media in general. So there were a lot of emerging things at the time, from the web that was becoming more and more interactive. I'm talking about the late 2000s. When you are applying kind of technology to cinematography, you need to learn so many different things. I think the idea of people that put the class together was like, you need to do motion controls. You can imagine, Industrial Light and Magic in their first, making Star Wars was very analog, but there were a lot of tricks using camera motion. So there was a very big foundation on both software and hardware, because the idea is that you're not bound by becoming a deep expertise in one field. You need to use the right tool for the job, and you have all this very broad skill set. And so that's how I basically got to touch both hardware and software. And I was lucky enough to, I joined the industry. I worked a little bit in that world, but at some point I wanted to kind of get deeper into really this intersection about design and the design for physical objects that is interactive, so interactive product. And I found the school a little bit by vicinity. It was in Copenhagen, but also the school was started in Italy before. We can talk more about the genesis of the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. But the focus of the school was really on tangible interaction and on physical computing as a space. So that year of program was really for me to get deeper into this field of tangible user interfaces and physical computing.
Yeah, I'm curious, before we go further, why were you originally interested to be part of like cinematography and the production? Like what was, and also that program, like who were they preparing, so to speak?
During my high school, I attended a cinema course, and there were very interesting questions I were asked during that class, and they were asking, what did change your mind the most? And I looked back in my youth, so the things that marked thresholds were actually driven by some movies that really touched me, mostly documentary movies that I really felt connected with. And that was like something that really made me feel of, I want to be, I want to work in the innovation space. But I do think that there is one of the questions that made me pivot to do the path that I took was like, who did invent the submarine? Was Jules Verne, or was the guy that actually invented the submarine, years later and made it happen? And so I think there is a power of stories, and so that really interested me, of telling stories in an interesting way to capture people's imagination. Is that what ignites that then run and looking to make the thing that you have imagined real. So I've been very, very interested in that space. And to finish your question, which figures were these, what was my university kind of forging? I think they were trying to, there was a big shift both in cinematography and in public television. I mean, in television in general, there was transitioning from analog to digital. So those were the time in which we were using less and less film, both for filming and for distribution. And that opened up a lot of opportunities in both from a storytelling perspective, because digital allows you to do a lot of things that before were harder. And on another level was also because the industry of cinema was changing, was pivoting from analog to digital. So they needed new professional figures that could step in.
Got it, got it. And so when you finished that program, I'm assuming you finished, maybe, what was your first, like, what caught your attention in terms of, what were you thinking to try yourself to do, or what was your first job right after the university?
The first job was actually as a 3D modeler. So I think the world of like video games and using game engines to make new types of interfaces that were going beyond what the strict human interface guidelines were giving. So kind of this experimental approach to digital media and to interactive media was something that I was really interested in. So I jumped on, worked on a few video games, worked for a game company in Italy, or actually it was a pretty interesting company. Was mixing interactive media and applying it to different spaces. They were making interactive equivalents of books and enhancing the experience of, for instance, traveling, creating guides for cities. The theme, I think, of the first few years of my career were really about reimagining analog things in the digital world. And yeah, this new world of interactive media that you can touch, and there is a new world of gestures to understand and to.
What years are those? Is it like early 2000s?
Yeah, so this is 2009, 2009 to 2012, I would say. Are those like 3 years before I went
Yeah.
to the Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design in 2013.
Got it. I wanted to kind of to sort of fast forward quite a lot, that I think a lot of people who may be clicking on this video would have a question about your experience at Humane. How would you say what happened? What happened with Humane? Why did it ended up the way it did?
Well, Humane was a a very exciting experiment of playing with things that were not there. And we really invented some things that we thought could be the future. I think there are manuals on how to run startups, and they tell you that you need to fail fast and fail cheaply. Even if you are ex-Apple, you have the best team, at the end of the day, that still applies. Apple is successful the way it is because their first product was built by 3 people in a garage, and it was a thing that was hacked together and slowly grow in the form that it is now. And I think in Humane we didn't have that chance of building something small that created the momentum. And I think there are many problems with timing. The time works against you because the more time you is elapsed from the time you start the project, especially like in which you start a startup and time you launch, things are changing in the industry very fast, and so you need to pivot. And every pivot is really costly in terms of resources that you are spending, and the product gets shaped in a way in which you don't, it feels like you are reactive. At some point you have this big vision, and then at some point you are reactive on what's happening, and so you lose a little bit of that spark of magic. But I think overall it was an incredible experience in making something new, in also what are the things, the big learning for me. And I think everyone can take that as like spending a lot of money and being kind of stealth for a long time. It usually doesn't, it's very hard that you are predicting the market. The market at the end is what is making the product successful or not. If people want the things that you're doing, and even if you are competent in executing the project, still the market decides successful or not. If people want the things that you're doing, and even if you are competent in executing the project, still the market decides. And I think the biggest one other takeaway is the story around why you needed that device. I don't know if the company have done a enough good job at telling why would you do the things that you can do with the device. And I think is overall regarding AI, I think it's like is a tool that we are using more and more, but we are learning uh, a little by little why it's why is something that we want versus at the beginning you're always defensive on new things coming. Change is hard, especially on things that live in the space, in the physical space, that require charging and wearing it. And so that I think there are all these constraints that one need to take into account. And eventually, if there is more value than the friction that you bring into the world, then your product is successful. But if you're not, you need to communicate that value very cleverly.
You wrote 6 principles of sustainable computing, and I was looking through that, and I think one of the principles is to ask the first one. I think it's about understanding whether something needs to be done in the first place, right?
Yes, and I mean those are very dear to me, and I think they've been. I wrote that with my partner Zaza, because we as a reaction to a lot of things that are happening in the world and we see happening. The first principle is elevate the human condition, and that is something that I've been thinking through. As technology sometimes can be a companion to us, and sometimes it just replaces us. And I think is a fine line, and we can think about that as like the abacus, for instance, is a very complementary technology. You can use it, and the more you use it, the more you internalize it, and at some point you have a mental image of that device in your head, and you can be super fast at making calculus, even pretty complex ones. Instead of calculator, you use it, and the more you use it, the less of that muscle you're exercising. And so you're actually, the calculator replaces a mental function. And I think that's something that I think if we look at computers and I would say the ecosystem of things that surrounds us, not just computers, mostly mobile phones. Mobile phones are the main interface we have with, how we move around because we carry in our pockets and the daily chores and interactions. I think there is a lot of thoughts on how to make those frictionless and, remove the friction, make that very convenient. But then if we dig a little bit deeper, I think we could put things in the design that actually help us to be more, to elevate the human condition. So to really bring different layers. If you want the convenience, it's great that it's there. But then if you want to go deeper, you should be able to. So I think that's really what that principle is. It's like, it's great to have technology that makes our life easy, but it also as a reflection would be great if you want to be better at orienting yourself in the world, if you want to be better at math, these tools should just allow you to do that because they can.
And sort of going back to kind of tapping into Humane again. And by the way, like maybe if there are some things that I know, maybe, part of NDA or things like that, feel free to kind of skip around. But how would you answer that question? Like if you're kind of knowing what you know today about that path and about the technology, let's say you were looking again at this as a new challenge, like making this device, with the, AI based projection, with the screen, with the, hand as the medium for the interface.
Yeah.
Do you think it has the viability? Like, would you did something sort of didn't quite connect maybe about the execution or timing, or is it sort of more fundamental that maybe is the reason?
I think I think, I mean, first of all, this is a great question. I think we have a problem of this like overload of information coming to us, and I think there is a space. Apple is trying to do that with this kind of smart notifications that are grouped, and there is kind of a little summary. I think AI has potentially have a role in that, and I think that's a space in which Humane was in. I think from a form factor perspective, I think it's really interesting to think about projecting a patina of digital into the world. I don't know if the form factor is something you wear necessarily, but the idea that you could take pieces of the digital world and you can project them into books, into your bookshelf, showing you things that you love to have in your hands. And I think the screen is really like, is a window into this parallel universe. And sometimes you don't want to be there. Sometimes it's great to be there, and sometimes you don't want to be there. And when you don't want to be there, I think projection is a really interesting technology. And I think what Humane has proven that you can have really, really tiny projectors. So I think that's really exciting. I think the technology needs to improve to have the brightness that is required to work in many different conditions. So I think there is something there, and the resolution is still not where it can be. I think there is a lot of work that can be done. I think contextual computing, if you want, could be a space that is really interesting, and it doesn't need to have a lot of AI in it. It's really about understanding what are the relevant things around me that are like timely and that are like located around me. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think AI has great power in what I was saying before, kind of, having this kind of really language intensive functions. Translation is probably the one in which excels the best, especially on this form factor. And with someone that doesn't speak my language and I can interact with them in a simple way, I think that there is a lot of power there.
And you mentioned that it's very important that the market at the end of the day determines whether the product is successful. The common way to determine that earlier on and sort of like de-risk is through user testing, through research, through putting it out, in front of people. I mean, everybody knows that. I'm curious, like, have you guys been involved at that part with Humane or not really?
You're hitting in a very you're hitting a really good point. We didn't do enough. People didn't know how to use a mouse, and now it makes people laugh. But some people were like holding the mouse upside down and try to move the ball inside the mouse. They really didn't know how to think of it, and that process is so important. I think as we think of us as good designers, and we thought of that at Humane, or like we are designing for ourselves. But I think you risk to be part, like to put yourself in an echo chamber, and that echo chamber can be biased because we live in a certain geography, because we are a certain kind of people working on this. And I think is super, super important to put user research and validation in the process of design.
I imagine maybe there was sort of a concern not to reveal too much, and was that ever a concern of like why it wouldn't be sort of shown to more people, or maybe it was not done so for different reasons?
I think there are different reasons, and one of them is definitely secrecy, and you want to keep your project concealed as long as possible. But I think, and that's a marketing strategy that we can put under the scrutiny and as pro and cons. But I think the other thing that was really hard is like I think the technology was evolving very rapidly, and we were never in a moment in which we were like, this is exactly how we think is gonna ship up until the day it shipped. So it was this kind of evolving project. So I think it became clear that a lot of the things that, it became clear what the product was not so far from the shipping date. So we were limited in that regard. The technology was very complex, and it took a lot of iteration to get right. And that definitely was a big factor, the technology not being ready, and so being hard to test. I think that's a big factor. That was a big factor at Humane, and it's very different when you're doing a 1.0 product versus you're doing a product that has version 17. Testing a new feature, you already have a baseline. You already know how things behaving in terms of everything. And when you're making a new product, you're kind of in a new territory. And I think there are very good ways to test, and you need to be very creative.
Yeah, it's really interesting how like finding that balance, it's so difficult, and probably so much depends also on just on luck. Like I've been personally in a situation where I was helping with the design of like a biotech startup, and I knew very little about biotech at that time, and I still don't know too much. But the founder, like slash kind of head of product, he was the domain expert, and we trusted sort of like he seemed to know what had to be done, and we sort of were more or less executing for a very long time without really doing much of research at all. And that was relatively early in my career to even like have that, like, hey, this is like so important to do research. And for better or worse, I don't know if it was like the best outcome, but eventually the company got acquired by like another big company. It seemed like a pretty overall successful exit story. And it was definitely an example where I saw that, what, it is possible. Like if somebody really knows what needs to be done, and then you do it. So I know it's possible. I saw the quote from one of the folks at Linear, this like product development product management tool. And the quote was something like, doing like too much research and like relying only on customer feedback will lead to like mediocrity, and not doing enough will lead to being out of touch with the market, something like that. How do you find that balance of like the right amount of research and the vision?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm going to refer to a book that is called The Right It. And I think that there is also, so The Right It is a book that talks about what are the strategies that you can use. And it's very general, but there is a concept that's called prototyping, that it basically says, prototypes have different meaning. We think of prototypes as like very technical things, and, we are testing, in a very specific and hard way. But prototyping is a little bit softer in the sense that it's trying to really understand the market. I think when we talk about research, I think there are so many facets of research. I think the research process I really like is to find inspiration. And as you find inspiration through talking with people, I think you see the problems they have when you get out of your echo chamber. And I think that's, you're still the designer. You're not biasing your product or design or experience based on what people say. You're not A/B testing, but you're really trying to see problems from a different perspective, or discovering opportunities from a different perspective. And I think that opens up a lot of creativity that shapes your product in a better way. So I think that is in different forms. I think the form I like the most is one-on-one kind of interviews, or like interview one person at a time, and really kind of understanding what are the things that they value, what are the things that they look for, especially when you're trying to put some new product into their life, a tangible product that lives with them. It's like, does it fit their house? Does it fit their style? Does it fit the textures that they like to touch? Does it fit the experience? Does the functionality is something that they want? Is there a kind of adjacent functionality that you didn't think about at all, but it's actually in your wheelhouse? Some of those features were part of the hype of the moment, but some very fundamental things I think could make a big difference. And I think if you channel that through observation, I think it's much more fun. Like it's much easier to publicize inside your team, in the management of the company. And I really recommend this book, The Right It. And I also think there is a quote about interaction design as a field. You need to design the thing right, but also then you need to design the right thing. I think this also brings us back to elevate the human condition and really thinking about the things you are doing. Is that a thing that you wanna have? Is it something that you want your neighbor to have?
Yeah. What would be like if you had a kind of a magic wand and knowing what you know, what would be like a couple of things that you would have sort of tweaked and done differently with the approach on the humane?
I think, well, one thing I would say is be more true to the original vision that I was describing before about contextual computing, and not let the AI wave take over and people to become this voice first device. I think we think that voice as this big is a big part of the future of interaction, and I challenge that. I think it's very verbose, and I think it's also very invasive. It's still confined to this idea of personal computing that I think we are going to eventually evolve out of, especially when we see more spatial computing and more calm technology. I think it's going to be about feeling and touching and be able to quickly control something. And I think there is a big aspect of kind of intelligence systems that are going to power these things, in which are going to surface the right thing at the right time. But I don't know if the main interface needs to be kind of this very heavy voice interface. So I think that's one thing I think I would love to see if we would go back, and then the other thing I think is just like be less polished. This is a 1.0 product. I would have liked to see it as a cheaper and faster iteration. This could be the thing that has been shipped could be version 2, version 3.
I agree with you, by the way, about the voice interface. Like it never felt that right. I mean, I have to say, I do like sometimes to interact maybe with voice chat GPT, kind of like hearing the response. There is a certain use case, but I don't really see how voice is really that much more effective. And maybe also partially, and I wonder if that's could be English is not my first language, and especially like a little bit earlier in the days, like interacting with like Siri was horrible. It still is horrible. And so I think now it's much better, generally speaking. But yeah, voice to me also never really felt like it's the next thing, because some things are just easier and faster to do with a button.
I mean, I think voice is great in certain contexts. I think the car is the prime example. You're driving, you need to do a few actions. That works very well. So I don't discount voice as an interface. Don't think that's going to be, I think it works well when the conditions are right for voice.
What are some of them? So you probably thought about it quite a bit. And I want to also talk about, you mentioned the term calm technology, which I think it refers to partially to the product that you started. We'll talk about that soon. But before we go there, I wanted to ask, so voice as an interface, that's one example. Then there is the projection sort of, as an interface, that what Humane tried to do. That's another example. What are some of the other types of interaction, with the physical devices that are out there, and maybe ones that you are personally excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think there are so many simple things, simple ones that we discount that are like, little knobs and buttons. And, there is a nostalgia of those that we used to have in the times in which those were the main interfaces. And if I think about the devices that teenage engineering is doing, like their field recorders is like really nuanced and really exciting. Knobs and wheels and tactile wheels brings back like the beginning of the iPod was also this kind of rotary dials that worked really well and have very satisfying like clicking noises. I think there are many more nuanced way of, like, for instance, holding objects and twisting them. If you think about a space that is able to sense you, you could interact with just like objects that you have around and they could act on the world with you, for you. I think that every interface is judged by, how quickly does the thing that you need to do. And that thing that you need to do can be as simple as turning on a light and turning off a light. And in that space, you don't need, that the simplest interface is gonna win over all the complicated ones that we have. And like a button is great. But I think it's like when you start to look at text entry, I think that's where the domain starts to become really interesting. I think potentially typing on every surface could be something to explore that I haven't seen yet. Maybe people will try that. I think
On the surface, you said?
yeah, on surfaces, you could have projections, and you could like use every surface to text and to do very complex things. I'm thinking about dynamic land. I don't know if you've seen. Dynamic land is a research project by Brett Victor that was running in Oakland. It was a big space with projections everywhere, and you could like take a piece of paper with a fiducial, so the system knew what you were doing with that piece of paper, and you could like embed in it some form of interactivity that was coming for just like reading the space. So dynamic land, that's I think a way in which we are going to but I think is a future. And I think that first picture that has been painted by dynamic land is really interesting. It's dynamic media, as takes from the ideas of Alan Kay that talks about the Dynabook and kind of projects it in space. So this idea of
Is
like
it dynamic land or dynamic what?
Dynamic land. Dynamic land is
Okay.
it was a
Dynamic land. Okay.
is really a space in which every
Okay.
surface is
Okay.
interactive. They have really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting as a computing environment as well, in which it uses interactivity as the main medium just by placing a piece of paper and connecting a piece of interactivity to that situated piece of paper. So you can build, a game. You could build, educational systems all by projection. So that's what I was latching on. And I suggest people to have a look at Dynamic Land. It's a really interesting project. Also, Brett Victor writes a lot about interaction design, and I think there are
Were you part of
interesting
it as
thoughts.
well? Did you
No,
participate in it?
no. I used to go when it was open in Auckland to their public days, and I used to go there, and it was really nice.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, let's dive into your product that you started. It's called, well, I don't know if it's called air quality sensor. Does it have a name? What is what?
Yeah, I mean, so the product doesn't really have a name, and the catch on that is, there is one point of inspiration for this, and there is this product company in New York that is called CWNT, and their message is, don't worry about branding too much. Make sure that you don't spend your time into making logos and websites. Build the projects that you want to build first, and then branding is something that you can always get better at. And so basically that's what happened. I left Humane. I really wanted to build something, and so I kind of jumped in. We tried a lot of names, and no name really worked very well. And I didn't want to. I think there are two paths in design now. It's like, one is to find this very analytical name, OD11, TX6. And then on the other side, there are these like very quirky names that I feel like too many products are called, that are like a blend on the popular names. And if you want to find a really good one, you need to really invest in that. And so I just jumped into it, and the code name has been Air Quality Sensor. And when I needed to launch it, I was like, well, it's just going to be called Air Quality Sensor by Studio LUFF. And I ran with that.
Yeah, this is cool. It's funny. I did not realize that I stumbled into, manifest. I thought maybe like I didn't read it, but it's a cool, I mean, it's a great concept. There is in Japan also, there is this brand Muji that,
Yeah.
they have a kind of, I mean, they do have a brand, but they're trying not to put any of the logos on it. And it's funny, it reminded me, talking about like complex names, there is this company, it's called Western Hydrodynamic Research. And what they do actually, they just produce hats and like beach towels. It's basically they're like a surfing kind of like a surfer company, but they have this like super complicated name. Anyway, so you after Humane, you decided to start LUFF Studio, right? And did you know that you wanted to work specifically on the air quality sensor, or you just thought that you wanted to work on something of your own?
I mean, both. The air quality sensor is a project that I've been working on for many, many years. I was really unsatisfied with the product you could buy online, as it happens. There are cheap ones now. There are more available now. There are more than there used to be. When I started the project in kind of 2019, 2020, we had bad wildfires. Actually, even before, we had a big wildfires in 2018, I think, in the Bay Area, and then in 2019 and 2020. And those were really making me think about I should know more about the air that we breathe. And the more I was reading, the more I got into it. I think traffic was also a big factor of that. I worked on electric cars and tried to understand is like how much transportation around me is influencing my state of health. I think that is something that is really made me think more about the project. And then I started to, buying things online, not liking them. I didn't like some of them were very obscure about what they were doing with the data. Some they were very, unreliable compared to kind of some sensors that I was testing at the time. So I kind of decided that I wanted to make my own. And I want to make my own for many reasons. One was I want to control my data. The other one was that I wanted to find something that really fits in my house and I like. The cheap ones are like these plastic boxes and they're very anonymous. The ones that are more expensive, they're more nuanced. But then maybe they were lacking a little bit of, transparency on where the data was going. And so then at the end, I decided that this was a thing I want to work on. And so over the years, I made many different iterations of this project to get to where it is now. I think the project really at the moment in which I left Humane, there was kind of something that was ignited by many conversations with friends.
Can you maybe describe a little bit the concept of the sensor, like what we're looking at here? And for those who are listening, you can also tune in and watch.
Air quality is a very, very complex problem. It's very many, many different facets. There is, gases that affects our health, what we call VOCs, and particulate that is suspended in the air and gets into our respiratory system. The sensor is looking at very small particles. These small particles are problematic because when they enter our respiratory system, they can go through our lungs and enter our bloodstream. And so that's why are harmful. These particles are given by many different things: cooking, traffic and cars, burning wood, wildfires, and many, many different reasons why these particles might be in the air. So that's what the sensor is sensing. And it tries to give, it gives the indication to the user is this light that is projected in the back of the sensor. So it's this a dial that you attach on the wall. You can tap to see, the current air quality level. And it really works like a rotary indicator. So the more it goes up on the other side, like imagine a chronometer or like just a dial, a speed dial. air quality is bad, there is a little notification. So you can see here in number 2, if we go down, if you don't interact with it, but the air quality is sensed to be bad, then there is a kind of a subtle notification. It just animates and it tells you that the air quality is bad. So this is the main way the sensor lives in your space. There is also a web interface, and the web interface has not just the current air quality levels, but also as a historical. So you can see what happened this morning, yesterday, a week ago, and you can that's a tool that is there because it's meant for you to understand better your space, your environment.
Intent behind the sensor is you put it in your space, and if it's giving you a green light, everything is fine. If it's giving you a red light, something to look into, right? Is that kind of the general idea?
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Okay. And so you mentioned before that idea of like technology, and I think I was reading through descriptions that the way I understand it, and I'm curious if I get it correctly, is that technology is about having things that are not really interfering and disturbing your kind of normal flow. They're there, they're working for you, but when you need them, they're there for you. But otherwise, they're not trying to like crawl into your space with notifications and like loudness and grab your attention. Is that kind of the concept of that, or maybe something different?
That's the concept of it. I think the idea of quantum technology comes from this kind of third wave of computing, in which computing are more distributed. We don't need to think about them; they are there for you when you need them. The way I see them in the more modern, the less academic and the modern or more contemporary time and space. I think there is a lot about the ecosystem, the industrial ecosystem around technology that is not calm at all. You're grabbing, you're if you are trying to make a product today, the only way your product is successful is to monetize it in so many different ways. Even if you make hardware, at this point, you are really hungry to to monetize on the data, because the general population is so used to have cheap or free pieces of technology. Like most of the surfaces that we see every day are, we have Gmail that is free, or we have, our social networks are free. And the consequence of getting used to that is that there is another way in which these companies are monetizing their products and services, and that's the thing that you don't see. And so I think that at some point, if you are one of the companies that are trying to make things, you need to grab attention. You need to be on the forefront of making people give you data. And so I think for me, calm technology is really to break out of that paradigm and making technology that is calm, that it is not trying to compete for your attention. It doesn't require, it doesn't require you to be engaged, to give a lot of data out for the things to work.
Did you coin the term technology, or is it?
No, Technologies actually comes from Park, from the research lab that Mark Weiser was running. And work was really about creating distributed touch points in which you could interact away from your desk, and having things that are on in your living space kind of everywhere. And it's still, the research at Park was very officey and very office oriented, productivity oriented. But I think there are a lot of, a lot of things that we could still pick up today. This is research from the 90s, from the early 90s.
Curious about a couple of things here, and we have like maybe 30 minutes. I want to cover a couple of themes, but if I understand correctly, this was your first experience creating the vision for the product and doing the entire thing from software to hardware to marketing to selling, the whole end to end, right?
Yep.
Yeah. How do you feel about it, that whole process? Like, what are your main learnings so far?
So many learnings. I think the biggest thing I learned is I think there is something daunting when you're like approaching, for instance, like Kickstarter. There are so many questions that you don't know the answer to when you are like at the beginning of that process. You're like, oh, I think I know, but then you actually don't know, and things change. And so I think it's the confidence to get into that process. I think now if I would do another product, I would feel so much more confident. It's like, oh yes, I can do it. Even if it's not simple. I was thinking to manufacture everything in China. Then I traveled through Europe and I actually found a European manufacturer. The device is designed that is manufactured as much as possible in Italy. That I was totally what I wasn't expecting, but that came basically with a big redesign. And so it took time and a lot of things to figure out, both from a logistic perspective. It was really, really hard to ship things everywhere in the world from Italy. Is much cheaper and easier to do that from China. But then also the object needed to do a big redesign because some parts were cheaper in the place where I was manufacturing, so I needed to like swap them for other parts. Packaging was different, better. So it was a roller coaster overall, but I think the biggest takeaway for me was the confidence of jumping into to any of these projects and taking the joy of figuring out every step, even if it's hard.
So how do you feel? Would you consider doing another
Oh,
device?
I cannot wait to do another one.
Yeah. Do you have
Yeah,
ideas already? Do you know the direction?
I have many ideas, yes. And I think first of all, now I've been working on this project and I know this project very well. I think I know the manufacturing of this product in and out. So I'm really excited to actually take this project and do potentially another campaign or do another kind of marketing run so I can push the project out again now that I know how to make it and I know how to make volume of it. And so that's, I think, is the first step, is actually the Kickstarter was great, but I was also kind of conservative in the way I was marketing it, because I was like, oh, if I get too many and it gets out of hand, I'm gonna be conservative. But now I really feel confident that I could make a lot more units of this project. So the first I think step is to do more marketing and more, think maybe working more on the brand.
And did you sell out like the first production run, or how did it do overall, like financially, if you don't mind? Like you don't need to share details, but just in general.
There are still a few units that are available through my web store, but I think the power of Kickstarter is that you can test the market. So all the units of the Kickstarter are, they've been dispatched. Very, very few units are still on their way to their backers, but most of the units have been already distributed and sent to backers. And depending on the demand, I'm ready to make new unit and create a new inventory for them.
That's awesome. I mean, it's I'm personally inspired by this, and I was gonna ask you if somebody wants to try, to kind of get their feet wet with hardware, physical devices. Let's say they are web engineer, digital engineer, or designer, but they have no idea about the process and what it takes. Like, I mean, what are there these days, are there like platforms that allow to make things easier? Like, I don't know, is there like cursor for physical devices, or like, I think you're using Arduino here, right? Like, I don't know, like how feasible is it, to for somebody who's not, because obviously you've dedicated your life to this, right? And there is so much around it. Is it feasible for someone to try, or is it like kind of very complex actually?
I think the moment, yeah, well, so I think of course it's complex. When you make physical things are complex for many reasons that people maybe don't think about, but there is a lot about, just how do you get boards to people? Just like a logistic shipping. Those are all things I learned, and they're actually not as easy as people might think. And they're very custom, on every geography has its own rules. But I think apart from that the electronics part and the kind of more physical part, I mean, Arduino is a great place to start. Arduino is one of these gifts that we had, I think, is open source and is really, really easy to look at the documentation that they created. So then you can create something similar. I think without Arduino, this project would not be possible. And I think a generation of designers that sketch in hardware would not be there. And so I think Arduino is a great platform. SparkFun also, there are a few satellite. Arduino is the biggest name, and there are a few satellite other companies like SparkFun in which they are handing out their schematics. So you can once you learn a few components, then you start to think with them and you can really quickly sketch things. I would say that the things that are still part of the design space is still doing user research, validating the market that you can do with Kickstarter. If people don't buy your Kickstarter, maybe there is people are not interested in that. And I think you have tools to improve that, how to tell your story. There are a lot of satellite things that are not the product itself. I think the product itself, brings a certain value, and you need to understand what's the value for the users that you have. And that's a very hard things to do. You know what the product costs, but then it's what are people willing to pay for it is a completely different story. And it's about capturing the imagination of what people think that product would do in their lives. And I think for me, that has been a long process of designing this product, making a few prototypes, giving out to people and seeing people kind of responding to it, saying, this really changed the way I think about my space. Now, when I cook, I see that if I'm frying something, I just start there, an air purifier before I even do that. Sometimes I see the air quality that is bad, and I never knew about that. So those moments are the one that I think, as a design process that are really, really valuable and brings you closer to making that project. I would say you can build, if you're really interested in interactive products, starting very simple. It's the way to go. The more there is a lot of complexity, especially in software, there is a lot of complexity. There is a lot of complexity in hardware, and there are different complexities. Software, especially when it starts to go to the cloud, you need to have servers. And that's something that I'm really conscious about. I want to make a product that doesn't have that aspect. Its longevity is based on the project itself rather than depending on a functionality that is external. We see it for so many projects, right? It's like the company gets sold or the company discontinues the product, and then you have this piece of hardware that doesn't do anything anymore. And so that's something that I really didn't want to happen. And so that's something I think as a design principle to take into consideration.
Let's say for folks who are curious and interested to try, and I'm kind of trying to see how accessible things are today. Like, for example, we know these days that writing code became a lot simpler because people can go to like ChatGPT and like it's going to generate code, right? So let's say I wanted to build like a light that if I go through my door, it's going to turn on red. Just something super basic,
Yeah.
right? But it's going to have a motion sensor and it's going to just light up. Like, how accessible is to build something like that? What do you need to know, and what kind of pieces do you need to connect to make it happen?
I think, the brain that is gonna do the choreography of turning that on, it's code. So you can, there are a lot of tools that help you to do that. And the kind of the electronic part, it's really simple. It's taking Arduino. There is you can take a starter kit, start to understand what sensors are there, what type of sensors, and then slowly, the sensing aspect is really a design material understanding, like what can you sense? And there are things that are super simple to sense. Light, buttons are, I would say, there is a universe of things that are like continuous versus things that are like just like like buttons. So it's like they're a 1 or a 0. So those are generally easier to and you can build also those sensors, and your minds, as soon as you understand that, you can see how it, we have a lot of those devices that work that way. Then there are the continuous controls that in the physical space you can imagine sliders that people use for music, handles, knobs. So those are continuous controls, and they are, from an interaction perspective, you need to think about how do you feedback of what's happening. And so your world starts to expand on that. And then there are environmental sensors. So then that's another universe of things that you need to understand, and is most likely an invisible things that you want to sense. Like air quality is invisible. How do you sense that? How do you understand it? And so those are part of your toolkit as a kind of hardware interaction designer to think through problems. And so there are, like, I would say, two big classes of sensors: interaction sensor or interaction affordances, and then you have, environmental sensors that you probably just want to give this power of sensing invisible things and giving that power to people.
What do you teach at UC Berkeley? Like, is that what you teach, or do you teach something different?
No, I've been teaching physical computing for many years. I actually just came back from a tangible user interfaces class where we really go deep into these topics. The class I teach at UC Berkeley is called Designing for Emerging Technologies. And that is a class I really love because we reflect on what is emerging technologies and why certain technologies are emerging. And I think the thought process there is to, there's an historical reason of what is emerging technologies actually comes from a business perspective of, whereas it is very connected to the business culture of investing and kind of being on the front edge of the curve, where there is like a lot of value when that gets created when a technology is like really not there, and then it gets kind of exploited into becoming a real product or finding new markets. And then the technologies that we want to see as designers. So what are the design narratives that we want to create to support emerging technology that we want to see? And so that's the work that we do with the students, is to finding those technologies, finding that landscape of technologies, thinking through them, and then create prototypes that then we showcase at the end of the semester.
The holistic, like end-to-end, taking into consideration not just the thing itself, but also how it fits into the world, the potential for the commercial viability, right?
Well, yes, and I think the things that we try to push the students to do is to create narratives more than, the objects that they create, more than a, financial viability, as a storytelling potential. And that is how we push them to think through the qualities of the product to be usable and to be, something that could be real. But also we push them to explore new technologies. A lot of them have been going into kind of this hybrid between biology and the digital world. And so some students have really created new things, starting from the idea that, challenging what emerging technology is. It's easy to think about, AI is the emerging technology at the moment. Potentially 5 years ago would it be autonomous driving, and 5 years prior to that maybe it was, mobile internet in our pockets. And I think the experiment here is like, which technology do we want to see emerging? Which technologies do we need in the world? And doing that, we create a landscape of potential things, and then they start to designing with them.
It's interesting. I don't know exactly how to formulate it. Let me try. Like in digital product design, it is very common to think about like the product market fit. And from our discussion today, I'm hearing that it is equally as important, if not more, in the hardware space, because you cannot change something as easily as software, right? After you ship it. It's like, what is your angle on, like, it's almost like this business aspect versus like craft and design and engineering itself? How much of a business understanding should an engineer or designer have? Is it something that more engineers and designers should sort of take upon themselves? Because traditionally, I feel like other people have been thinking more about it, and then engineers and designers are more like on the execution side. I wonder, like, is it almost the time to tap into these roles more and start to influence and drive that process? It's a big question, and I'm not sure if I'm like formulating it as well, but
I think the moment has never been so ripe as today to understand more of the holistic picture. And I think if you work in big technology, you might need to understand, the features that you're building. The features that you're building, they have consequences from a monetary perspective. And here I'm looking at kind of the A/B testing philosophy, in which is like everything is quantified in a really, really quantitative way. And that's not the way we want designers to work. But I think so there is that extreme in which basically the designer is reduced to choosing which things they want to test. But then there is, on another perspective that I think is like really, really interesting is getting to know what, a little bit that language of production and what leads to certain increases in the efficiency of the things that you're creating, and now that influences sales. And I think that's something that I invite designers to get a better read on. The power that you get there is that you can drive not just the design of things look, but also, having a bigger foot in the strategy of why we need a certain feature, why we need to act in a certain way, why certain things are important to be tested. So I think is an extra power that you get.
Before we close in the last couple of minutes, I'm curious, and it's like very much changing subjects. What was your experience like working at Apple? Like a lot of people, I think, are curious and maybe thought about like, well, it's one of the top companies in the world that outputs, some of the best products. What's the experience been like for you? And how does it feel when you're there?
I mean, working at Apple is an incredible experience because you basically are seeing behind the curtains of the Wizard of Oz. It's an incredible machine that runs very well, and there is like a lot of nuances of being there. There is a code for every product and for every project, and you need to get into the lingo of that. So it really takes some time to get into it. Just at the beginning, you're like, oh, I'm hearing all these, numbers, and I don't understand what people are talking about. And then so you really have a sense of the inner working of the machine. The machine is also so big, so it's really hard to have do you have a picture on how the iPhone is designed when you're there? As like maybe in design, you're lucky because you see a lot of it. But if you're in some parts of, other parts of the company, you might see just the things that you need to do your work and nothing else. It's really interesting, the scale of the company. The other thing I think Apple is very excellent at is that they have a kind of excellent. The company is structured by center of excellence. So there will be a camera team and a screen team and a connectivity team. The thing that people are building are really incredible. Thinking about cameras for the whole portfolio of products rather than having an iPad team and an iPad camera team and an iPhone camera team and a Mac camera team, rather than having like everything is centralized in a camera team that works on all these incredible products and has that depth, so it can create things that are really, really very, very good. There is incredible talent, and I think going into Apple is every day being exposed to an amount of kind of innovation that is, I think, very, very hard to beat.
Did it feel challenging?
I think the thing that really felt challenging was feeling that you're so tiny and not very important for the company. So you were like, oh, is my work, there are so many teams that work on things, and trying to see where your work goes, it's hard. In design, you're the final touch on the kind of the pixels, so that's very tangible. But I was more on kind of the ideation side. So we were very generative as a team. We were building a lot of ideas, but then to track down where did they go was a thing that I was struggling with. Let's put it that way.
Is it full of kind of bureaucracy because it's a big organization, or did they manage to find a way to keep that kind of like creative freedom flowing?
In my experience, Apple is a big company, and people might have experienced it in very different ways. But in my experience, it was actually really structured. And at times, that structure, it's kind of, you feel like you're always in this generative mode. And you're like, I feel like when you work in consultancy, you have like 3 months you work on this project, then you have like a month of maybe you are not on a project, and you have like 6 months you are on a new project, and you're in this very dynamic environment. And I feel like sometimes I think this is probably relatable to many big companies, is that you're like jumping into it, and week over week is very, very repetitive. You're like working on maybe things that the projects are very long and they're very structured. So you see a lot of the same things or the same situations, and can be challenging to not find the space for this kind of diverse thinking or like new perspectives. Like you're kind of always in this like routine and the structure that is given by the company, by the kind of product managers that go alongside.
And in closing, I'm curious, do you believe in spontaneous inspiration that sort of happens on its own, or do you more believe in cultivating and just continuing with the, with the craft and with the process systemically?
I think in both things. I think spontaneous inspiration is so important, kind of serendipity and serendipitous discoveries, serendipitous connections. That's why I think I wish for a lot of designers to travel, to sit into cafes, to put themselves in very many situations. I feel like also my life is a lot about staring at a screen for many, many hours, and that's definitely not a creative space. And giving, you know, giving credit to the fact that we have a right side of the brain to draw and draw, play music. Those are things that I think brings inspiration. And there are these two modalities, like solving problem, and at the end you are analytical, you apply a process, but then on the other side is be expansive, draw, and get a different state of mind. About sometimes those are the way in which you can solve the problems. I think on the other side, I think finding kind of inspiration into events, I think is another. Going to conferences, this is kind of more channeled through, is more guided. When you go to an event, you hear people talk. You also make connection with people that probably are thinking differently from you. Going to certain museums, that I think has also a tremendous value.
Awesome. Where can people who want to know more about you, where can people find you? And if somebody wanted to get in touch, I don't know, can they? And what should they do?
People can reach me through my website, through social media. I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days. I'm happy to get in touch with people. And I think in the way social media is a great way to connect.
So we're gonna drop the links to Pierre's website and LinkedIn in the description. Pierre, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I feel like we can talk for another 10 or maybe 20 hours. Personally, I would love to. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me. This has been super fun.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And I'll see you later.
Thank you. See you next time.